Time now to take a look at what's grabbing the headlines across the world. Belle Lupton is here with the International Press Review. We're going to begin with US Secretary of State John Kerry's trip to the Middle East. He's now in Doha. Belle, how is the Gulf press responding?
With scepticism to Kerry's message that the nuclear deal with Iran is a good idea. So Saudi news network Al Arabiya has this from the channel's former general manager. Arab Gulf governments cannot bet on the lives of 30 million citizens on the basis of good intentions and personal analysis. So this is Abdul Rahman al-Rashad, who goes on to say it's easy for superpowers like the US, which is more than 7,000 kilometres away from Iran, to sign deals. But Gulf countries need proofs and guarantees, essentially saying that unless there are those guarantees, ironclad guarantees, the Gulf countries don't believe that Iran will stick to any of these. Al-Rashad reminds readers of negotiations between Iran and the Gulf countries in the 1990s, which, he says, ended in an agreement in 2001, which Iran pretty much violated in its entirety.
So not the best reception in the Gulf press. How about the US papers?
Well, the Washington Post has an editorial, takes a different tack, focusing on the Obama administration's dilemma in his Iran policy, or in its Iran policy. Iran sends weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon, says this particular article. It's in the US's national security to stop that from happening. But Obama also says that Iran has to be included in talks to try and find a solution in the Syrian war. Now, according to the Washington Post, those two objectives are completely at odds. You can't do both of them because Iran needs control over Damascus airport and over the Syria-Lebanon border in order to keep supplying Hezbollah with the weapons that it needs. So since Iran supports Assad, that would mean that the Obama administration would have to essentially let Assad control those areas so that Iran could get through to them. Now, the Washington Post concludes that Obama is likely to shrink away from such decisions and hand a Syrian nightmare to his successor. The China Daily, if we move across now eastwards, the China Daily has an interesting angle. This one is instead focusing on China's, what all this means for China. Easing of sanctions against Iran, which would obviously come into place were this deal to be successful, will mean that the US will turn its attentions to the East and double its efforts to contain China by, obviously, trade with Iran as opposed to China. But, says the China Daily, a sanction-free Iran is good news for China because they can implement the Beijing-proposed Belt and Road Initiative. So, for a start, it gives the example, the oil exporter Iran will be able to meet China's increasing energy needs.
Okay, interesting angle there. Well, moving closer to home, the migrant crisis at the Channel Tunnel continues to dominate front pages both in the UK and here in France.
Yes, and Le Figaro dedicates more than a page to it with a whole bunch of different articles looking at different angles. There's one I'm going to pick out, which is about London and Paris. We've seen a lot in the last week of articles essentially highlighting how different countries within the EU are pointing the finger at each other. But Le Figaro here focuses on the ministers of France and the UK, the interior ministers, both showing a united front, saying that this is an absolute priority for them. Now, they point to the fact that 10 million more euros have been given by the UK in order to try and beef up security at the Channel Tunnel. But Le Figaro says that these two ministers, so Bernard Cazeneuve and Theresa May, say that they are only the front line, the first line of defence in this whole crisis. They want support now from the rest of the EU. Obviously, that reminds us of Greece and Italy's calls a few months ago when the migrants were first starting to come on their shores, when they were asking for that same help from the rest of the EU. Now, The Guardian has an opinions piece, so Crossing the Channel, The Guardian, which exposes the political hypocrisy on the UK side. So prime ministers have apparently said that they will welcome genuine refugees, but David Cameron doesn't even bother to pretend that Britain is a sanctuary anymore. It's taken in just a few hundred of the 4 million displaced Syrian refugees. And obviously, we know that these refugees want to reach Britain because of the, according to The Guardian, low-wage, under-regulated economy and because we don't have ID cards, says this article. It finishes, if we carry on like this, the Channel will become our Berlin Wall with which innocent people die trying to cross. And then a little cartoon in The Guardian also. There's the language that Cameron used last week to describe the migrants, swarm. There's a little cartoon that brings that back to us. A new political lexicon. So a tide of human misery, a swarm of economic migrants.
Okay, yeah, definitely an ongoing and quite depressing story, that crisis in Calais. But finally, let's look at a very different story, one that broke over the weekend. Apparently 1/3 of Olympic and World Championship medals for endurance events in recent years were won by athletes who recorded suspicious doping tests.
Yes, and I just want to show you one little cartoon on this. It's a Times cartoon, which obviously the article was broken in the sister paper, the Sunday Times, yesterday. Apparently 10 goals won at London 2012 could have been won under doping. This according to a whistleblower at the International Association of Athletics Federations, who leaked data looking at 5,000 athletes. So along with an expose last week on potential water contamination in Rio, it's not looking very rosy for the Olympics in 2016.
No, it isn't at all, Belle. Belle Lupton there with our international press review. Thanks indeed for that. Time